Hi, everybody. This is Chapter 9, A Democratic Revolution. I'll be going through the time period from 1800 to 1848. So when we look at the political system that was taking place at the beginning of this time period, it's very different from what it's going to look like at the end. Um, Men who didn't have any power or family connections or money really don't have very much political power. In fact, voting requirements were in many states, and that meant that um, not everyone could vote. Now, this is not even thinking about how women are not allowed to vote, African Americans are not allowed to vote, Native Americans are not allowed to vote. But in this case, even white men, not all white men are allowed to vote. Um, in fact, most states require you to own some kind of land. Some might require you to pay some kind of tax, be a level of a tax in order to vote. And over time, through this chapter, we're going to find that many states will get rid of those qualifications and give more political power to more people. Now, granted, still, this is only to white men, but this is kind of the basis of Jacksonian democracy, of giving more people more power. And we can talk in class about how it still did not give enough power out and enough equality out, but there is change in this. So here you can see in this map, well, there's only 3 states that give universal white male suffrage. By the time we get to 1830, there's many more states, and there's only 2 that require somebody to own property. So we talked about political parties in previous chapters, how during the 1780s and 90s, politicians are pretty afraid of political parties. We even heard from George Washington in his farewell speech to be aware of parties and to be careful that they could basically lock up the country so they couldn't get anything done. But by the time we get to the 1800s, now political parties are being run by professional politicians, people whose only job it is to be a politician, which is different from before. Before, people were lawyers or doing something else, and then they decided to become a politician. We also see change in what's called a spoils system, which means that if you are in power, then you would appoint and give jobs out to your friends and allies and people who donated money to you, people who helped you get into that position of power. And that kind of stuff still happens today. So political parties, when we get to the 1800s, are becoming more organized, and they're going to become more powerful. Now, again, who did not receive more power? In the 1700s, most women are farm wives, are supposed to have lots of children. By the 1800s, birth rates are dropping, which it's still pretty high. It's dropping to 6 children if you live in a farm, and 4 if you live in a big city. And marriage started being put off until until people were in their 20s. And there's this idea that women are the mainstay of a family. This idea called Republican motherhood, that women have a responsibility to make sure that the husbands are living a morally correct behavior, and that women are supposed to instruct children in the ideas of liberty and government. So they're supposed to teach their family how to be good Americans, which is also strange because they're supposed to teach them how to be good Americans, but women are not allowed to vote or become politicians. Women are expected to exercise their influence at home and not in public. For African Americans, a lot is changing in that way as well. The Atlantic slave trade is abolished in 1808, so that means no slaves are being brought across the Atlantic Ocean anymore. The Constitution is pretty passive when it comes to slavery. The government kind of uses it to protect slavery where it is. But there is growing anti-slavery positions in the North. Some states are beginning to abolish slavery on a state level. But generally, most, at least in the North, hope that slavery is going to die out naturally. We see that start to happen at the end of the 1700s. However, a new invention called the cotton gin makes sure this doesn't happen. A cotton gin is just a new invention that makes cotton more efficient. And so this makes plantation owners a lot more money, and they need more slaves then to grow more cotton and make more money. So anti-slavery positions, some believed in what's called colonization. Colonization is the idea that we start to give some people emancipation or freedom, and that those people would be then deported to Africa. And thousands of former slaves actually did this. Thousands would actually go to Liberia in Africa. However, most former slaves saw themselves as Americans. They spoke English. They didn't really practice any traditional African cultures anymore, or behaviors, and so wanted to stay in the United States. Were against colonization. And the last position was immediate abolition. This was seen as an extreme and radical position. So this is kind of just a way to kind of think about the different political parties during the time. When the Constitution is being created, there's Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, and then the Anti-Federalists become the Democratic Republicans. And then in Chapter 7, we talked about how the Federalists die out at the end of the War of 1812, and there's this period called the Era of Good Feelings. But is it really the era of good feelings? Southerners are afraid that the Northerners are going to push for emancipation. Slavery is going to be a huge point of contention between the North and the South. So in 1820, Missouri wants to become a state. And the big question is, would Missouri be a free or slave state? So there's some who say that they should only be a state if they get rid of slavery. Others say no, they should be allowed to have slavery. And the South can't agree, the North can't agree. And so a young congressman named Henry Clay, who we're going to hear about for a long time because will be really old by the time we talk about him again. Congressman Henry Clay creates a compromise called the Missouri Compromise. In it, they would decide Maine would become a free state. Missouri would become a slave state. That's the key thing, because what it does is it adds a free state and a slave state to both sides. And so that way, at least in the Senate, neither side gets more power than the other. So it's almost like if they're going to add a free state, they have to add a slave state. Okay, so now we have the purple states are all free states. Red are slave states. Now, the 1824 election is going to be very important for the next decade or so. The Democratic Republicans are split up, right? There's no Federalist Party right now, but the one party has like 5 different candidates, and they all believe something kind of different. We have John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, who we talked about already, and this man named Andrew Jackson, who was a war hero from the War of 1812. And after the vote, there are so many candidates that get electoral college votes that no one receives a majority of electoral college votes. When that happens, the Constitution says that the House of Representatives gets to vote on the top 3 vote getters. Now, Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House, so he has a lot of influence in that House of Representatives, and he was not one of the top 3, so he's out of the running. And so basically, he has a lot of power to influence other representatives to tell them who to vote for. And some believe that he used his influence to get John Quincy Adams elected as next president. Jackson is upset by this because he would actually have more electoral college votes than John Quincy Adams did. So he said, this is not fair. This is going against the will of the people. And he called this a corrupt bargain. So you can see here, John Quincy Adams in green, he had 84 electoral college votes. Jackson had 99. And so over 50,000 or just under 50,000 people voted for Jackson more than Adams, and he still lost. That's why Jackson's mad, and he is going to come back, and he's going to pay back. He's going to be ready for payback. So John Quincy Adams, he supports something called the American system. The American system was designed by Henry Clay, and it supports more northern states' ideas, like money for railroads. There's these 3 open circles. Those are the 3 parts of the American system. Money for roads and canals. So they want to build more roads and more canals. This is going to be able to transport goods from one city to another. He wants to create a national bank, one that is kind of run by private groups and by the government kind of together. It's kind of hard to describe, but they work together to create this bank, and it works. It was there in 1816. They want to support this bank. And he wants a protective tariff. Remember, a tariff is a tax on an imported good. So anything coming from another country, we put a tax on it. In 1828, there's a tariff added called the Tariff of Abominations. That's what people called it who didn't like it. And they raised tariffs really high, which Southerners hated, because Southerners either had to buy high-priced northern goods or they had to buy imported goods that had high taxes. And so Southerners, like Andrew Jackson, they don't like the American system because most of the money for roads and canals were going in the north. The National Bank, they worked with businesses that were mostly in the north. And the tariffs are backed by and help people in the north. So Southerners, like Andrew Jackson, do not like the American system. And so in 1828, Jackson is back, and Jackson gets all these other candidates who ran in 1824 to gather behind him, and they go after John Quincy Adams. And he does something different. He gets people to come together in mass meetings, kind of like rallies that we see today. They hold parades, and he calls himself a self-made man. They dropped the Republican part of their name and just called themselves Democrats to show that they wanted the will of the people. They wanted democracy. Jackson is anti-American system. He's anti-Native American. He's a little iffy on tariffs. And more people would vote in 1828 than ever before. More than half of Americans compared to only 25% in 1824. Okay, so the Federalists, they kind of created the National Republicans. That's kind of who it gets melded into, and the Democratic Republicans become the Democrats. So this is the 1828 election. Jackson wins with about 150,000 more votes. And kind of like the video that my class at least saw on On Thursday, there's a party at the White House. They're like destroying windows and draperies. The story goes that Jackson had to sneak out the back window of the White House, and that the only way that they could get people to leave the White House was they took these giant barrels of whiskey and put it on the front lawn of the White House and went in and said, "Hey, there's free whiskey outside." And people all left, and then they locked the doors behind them, supposedly. And so this brings us to Jacksonian democracy. So we talked about spoil system before, so I'm not going to mention that again. But Jackson is going to try to destroy the American system. He believes it's all unconstitutional. Jackson believes that one power of the president that he should use is vetoing. Before this time period, presidents really didn't veto laws unless they thought it was unconstitutional. Jackson is not only going to veto laws that he thinks are unconstitutional, but also laws that he just doesn't like. And so he vetoed 4 bills that would have invested money into internal improvements, which were ways the government was going to spend money. But now if they're not going to spend that money, why would they need high tariffs? He doesn't think they need tariffs, and so he wants to get rid of it. So the South still opposes the high tariffs, especially in the state of South Carolina. And the Southerners are getting nervous because they believe, man, the government is imposing a lot of power on us. What if they start attacking slavery? And so in 1832, Congress brings up more high tariffs. And so South Carolina decides to nullify the law. Nullify basically means they're going to ignore it. They're saying it's not constitutional, and they're just going to not follow it. They're saying that a state can void a law if it's passed by Congress. Okay, this is all about states' rights, and it's even supported by the current vice president, John C. Calhoun. Calhoun would actually resign over this issue. He would leave the vice presidency. He would then go on to defend nullification. Jackson, even though he doesn't really like tariffs, does not support nullification. He says this is not good for the country, and he passes a law, or he gets Congress to pass a law called the Force Bill, which would give him the power to send the military into the South to enforce the law. Jackson was able to work with Congress to help pass a compromise. It would reduce the tariffs, and South Carolina did not follow through on nullification. But this is a good early indication showing that Southern states are willing to go against the national government in pretty radical ways. And we're going to hear from South Carolina again very soon. Skip that one. Now, while Jackson wasn't a fan of tariffs and really didn't like the American system, the thing he hated the most was the Bank of the United States. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as BUS. He doesn't like the bank being operated by the federal government. So this bank would work with state banks to give people hard money. Hard money means gold or silver coins, not paper money, hard gold and silver coins. Because then you could use those gold and silver coins to buy land usually. However, the Bank of the United States started to hold on to this hard money, and so the state banks couldn't give out as much gold and silver coins and had to create paper money. And the paper money is not very great. At this time, the value of it goes up and down, and it's not dependable. And Jackson hates the bank. He thinks it's corrupt. And in 1836, the bank is about to be rechartered. And Henry Clay tries to do something cute. He's going to try to get the recharter of the bank early in 1832. He thinks that if Jackson vetoes this bill, the Democrats would stop supporting Jackson, and that basically it'd be a way to not only get the bank to be rechartered, but to hurt Jackson. So he doesn't really think it's going to veto. He's going to veto the bill. But look at that. Jackson does what he says he's going to, and he vetoes the bill. And he says Congress cannot charter a national bank because it's not in the Constitution. It's hurting the people. And so in 1832, Jackson made sure the bank would not be rechartered. And then for the next couple of years, before the bank officially was killed in 1836, Jackson started taking the gold and silver from the Bank of the United States and giving it to state banks that he supported, that he liked. People started calling these pet banks. Now, this is probably illegal, but he said it was the will of the people. And for the next 4 years, they would fight over this bank, whether they could keep it going or not. Congress is so upset by the president doing this that they censure him, which basically means we are publicly criticizing the president. And Jackson hates the bank. He said, the bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. And the bank is not rechartered. Jackson wins. A very unfortunate part of Jackson's policy is he's anti-Native American. And during this time period, Americans are beginning to move further and further west. And southern and midwestern states are calling for Native Americans to be removed. Even though some natives are assimilating into American culture, Jackson wants to get rid of Native Americans out of these southern states especially. He supports, along with Congress, the Indian Removal Act, which creates Indian territory where Oklahoma is today. And they say that Native Americans can live there forever. But basically, they're going to force different Native tribes to leave their homelands and would be forced to go on a trail of tears where hundreds and hundreds of people would die. Natives would sue the government. It goes all the way to Supreme Court in Worcester versus Georgia. And the decision comes across that the state didn't have the power over Indian nations and argued that the authority is held by the federal government itself. And Jackson supposedly said that John Marshall, the Chief Justice, has made his decision, now let him enforce it. So that's one of the problems with the Supreme Court, that they can make a decision, but it really is up to the rest of the government to listen to the Supreme Court. And here, Jackson didn't want to do that. The Trail of Tears is a great shame and scar on American history. Here you can see through that Indian Removal Act, all the different tribes who are sent west because of it. So even though Jackson supports a lot of ideas from southern states, he still supports the national government. When nullification happened, he threatened to use the military to stop the nullification supporters. But Jackson still supports state governments. He undermines the American system. He doesn't like the Bank of the United States. He doesn't like spending money on canals and roads. And in 1835, he nominated Roger Taney as the new Chief Justice. And Taney is a very big state right justice. He got rid of some of the nationalist decisions of the Supreme Court. And in this time period, many states started to revise their constitutions. We talked about how all white men were now allowed to vote. State legislatures began changing, be based off of population. More states and national politics started electing politicians rather than being appointed. But there were a lot of people who hated Jackson. In the 1820s, some people who didn't like Jackson were called anti-Masons. They didn't like Freemasons, they wanted temperance, and they didn't like Jackson. In the 1830s, there's the Whig Party. Anti-Masons joined this party, Basically, the Whigs believe in a whole lot of things. There's Northern Whigs who like businesses and the American system, and there's Southern Whigs who are against all those other things, against tariffs. They support slavery. But the one thing that unites all these Whigs is they hate Jackson. And so in 1836, the Whig Party is going to run for president against Andrew Jackson's successor. Jackson picks his best friend, Martin Van Buren. There he is, to be the next Democratic nominee. He is also against the American system. Temperance, he's against laws that would abolish slavery. And the Whigs can't agree on who to run as a candidate, because some people are Northern Whigs, some are Southern Whigs, and they don't agree. So they send 4 people against Van Buren, and that doesn't work. So they actually lose the election, even though if they would have put all of those votes into one person, they probably would have won. Martin Van Buren wins and becomes the 8th president of the United States. And immediately when Van Buren becomes president, there is a panic. A panic is like a recession or like a mini depression. A big part of it is because the Bank of the United States is gone, and so it can't really fix the economy. Americans are pulling gold out of banks. Cotton prices go down. So the economy is going really bad right now. The country is in a depression. Wages fall, prices fall, unemployment goes up. You have all these people trying to move west, and they try to use paper money to buy it, but that's now worthless because of the panic. And so many people selling bank speculators require specie circular, which means you have to pay in gold or silver, which, remember, is pretty much owned by the banks. Many people would blame the Democrats for the panic, especially because of closing the Bank of the United States. And Van Buren didn't really make any changes. And so in 1840, the Democrats are not going to do very well. Van Buren runs again against the Whigs, who are going to run only one candidate this time. And they nominate another war hero named William Henry Harrison. He served on a ticket with John Tyler, but Harrison is old. Remember that. In the 1840 election, we see the beginning of what's called a log cabin campaign, where you focus on connecting with the common man. Today, politicians refer to this as like, could you have a beer with the candidate? And it's supposed to just mean like, could you be like them? Can you see yourself in the candidate? A lot of times candidates for presidents will try to make it look like they're just like any normal person. And Harrison's supporters would say, this guy lives in a log cabin. He drinks hard cider, which many people lived in log cabins. Many people drank hard cider. But Harrison was actually rich, and he lived in mansions, not a log cabin. This is an anti-Van Buren cartoon that shows he can't drink hard cider, because over here he's drinking champagne and he likes it, and here he drinks he drinks hard cider and he can't drink it, which this might be the first meme. I don't know. Harrison wins the vote, and the Whigs are ready to get back into power, take power away from Jackson. However, William Henry Harrison becomes sick right at the beginning of his presidency and dies, I think it's 37 days into his presidency, which is the shortest tenure as president ever. And his vice president, John Tyler, becomes the next president. Now the Whigs had all these plans to bring back the American system, to undo what Jackson wanted. However, Tyler doesn't want to do what the Whigs want. He wants to support slavery and states' rights. The only reason why he joined the Whig Party is because he didn't like nullification. So basically, the Whigs didn't agree with anything John Tyler wanted, and so the Whigs kicked him out of their own party. The Whigs and Democrats would continue to fight over all these issues, taxes, slavery, into the 1840s. Fun fact, John Tyler, who we just talked about, was married twice. His second wife was 30 years younger than him, and John Tyler had a son when he was 63 years old. That son had his own son when he was 75 years old, and as of August 2019, I haven't checked this year yet, John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, has 2 living grandsons who are still alive, which is kind of weird. And it was over 160 years ago. So, okay, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please email your teacher. Thank you.